I guess so. This is I'm going to take a quick look through this deck that I've been calling over the past few weeks. I've titled it as DimirTrinket. Um, God only knows what everyone else calls it, but I think it's a cute little name, and I'm going with it. So it's basically this deck here. This is the version that I run when I do sit down and play it. It is a blue-black control deck that uses Trinket Mages to search out kind of a toolbox of cheap artifacts in hopes of giving yourself an advantage on the first game. Kind of the same thing when it comes to mystical teachings is the fact that you really want to create that toolbox, because when you have these things in your deck, main, it gives you an opportunity to win game one, and going into game two, you're increasing your odds of winning the series, winning the match. This isn't. I just want to say this isn't going to be hardcore. This is the deck and how it runs and how to play it kind of thing. This is I'm taking a look at kind of the importance of Trinket Mage. I think it is a card that gets a little bit underlooked when it comes to Pauper, as far as its playability. There are some options. Definitely check out the article, because I posted up kind of a list of some of the more efficient one or less mana costed artifacts. Excuse me, that Trinket Mage can fetch out. So definitely go check that out. But I did want to just take a quick look to this deck here and just kind of talk about how it runs essentially, and some of the plays that can be made. So obviously going to be running a full set of Trinket Mages. They are going to make up kind of the main idea behind the deck. And you kind of put together this toolbox. It's a great card. It's a 2-in-1. It's essentially card advantage, because not only is it a 2/2 creature, but you also have the ability, second ability, which is a tutor spell. And instead of having two spells taking up 2 slots in your deck, you're using one card to do both things. And even then some, when you start running the artifact lands, you see here we run 2 copies of Vault of Whispers, a single copy of Seat of the Synod. What you essentially do is also enable the Trinket Mage to become land fetch as well. So it's definitely a card that I think is highly underrated. Interestingly enough, it was printed at uncommon when it came to Scars, but it was a common when it was in 5th Dawn, I believe. That is, excuse me, and because it was printed common then, it is common to us now. So let's take a quick look at the artifacts that are available to us. Like I said, we are running the 3 artifact lands. We bring in the Life Staff, which is great. Good for the Goblins matchup, for any aggro matchup. It also works very well when it comes to red deck wins, Pestilence, stuff like that. Excuse me, I'm dying over here. This card is the ability to really gain a whole bunch of life and get a little out of hand with certain, things like the Fume Spitters. We'll get to that in a second. The next thing available to us is the Spellbomb. Am I gonna try and pronounce this? The Nihil Spellbomb, I'm gonna say. And this is a great card, mostly used for stuff like Dimir Post or Is It Post. I guess occasionally it could have its advantages in Storm if they're running Flashback on Faithless Looting, but it is basically there to handle the Flashback cards. I guess it's a great thing for any Reanimator strategy, Tortured Existence, etc. Most of the time when you use it, you're going to want to be able to pay that extra black mana to draw the card. I think it's definitely kind of a thing that people are starting to notice, and we see a couple other options being brought in these days for the matchups and getting rid of stuff. Especially even like Grim Harvest is something that you see occasionally in mono black control. So people are starting to realize that a little bit of graveyard control is something that should be noticed in Pauper. We'll put it that way. So next up on the list is a pair of Executioner's Capsules. You see here these are essentially their Doomblade, but in an artifact form. So they're kind of nice. You can put them out onto the table, and what you want to be able to do is have that out. If you say have an Executioner's Capsule and an Edict in hand, capsules on the board, use the capsule first to kill a creature, unless you can't kill it with the capsule. This way, because it's a permanent, your opponent knows about it, they don't know about the card in your hand. To them, that card could be anything, but they know the capsule's there, so definitely use the capsule first before going to anything else. Now that might be seen as kind of a small toolbox, and it is. I mean, you have only 3 real options outside of lands, but it's really all that's necessary. I don't think there would be much in the way of other things that you could bring in to help balance, or increase the toolbox, so to say. So let's see what else we have here. This deck actually tends to be more along the lines of mono black control. It's almost like a mono black control deck that was given a splash of blue, because we have so much in the way of hand control and creature control. We are bringing in a full set of Ravenous Rats, because it gives you a lot of options, especially in Storm. It gives you options in Stompy and Infect, and any control deck out there. Getting rid of an opponent's hand really is going to slow them down. Even matchups like mono white control. Mono white aggro. Jeez, I'm really winning on talking today, but the use of rats against mono white aggro where they don't have any options really to draw cards, stuff like that is where it can be beneficial as well. You also bring in, put that back, 2 copies of Duress, which is a great card. A lot of mono black decks run that in the sideboard, bring it in for the control matchups. I kind of like the fact that this deck brings it in main. Like I said, the whole thing about having the toolbox is to kind of increase the chance of you winning game 1, and thereby increasing your chance of winning the whole match. Duress is a great thing, not just for control, but definitely a combo as well. If you can, hit a Duress and get rid of an Empty the Warrens, you may screw your opponent. They have to sit around and wait till they draw into another one. Another thing that it could be beneficial for is playing Infect, and getting something like Invigorate and getting rid of that. So it's definitely a nice thing to have main deck, and we do have the other 2 copies on the sideboard, but again, we'll get there in a second. So when it comes to creature control, we're running 2 copies of Crypt Rats. This deck is actually really good when it comes to sweeping the board for the Warren Storm or even Goblins. It would do pretty well against. Okay, so we're doing 2 copies of Crypt Rats will enable you to wipe the board of a lot of big stuff. Affinity to it helps out, because they run into a lot of those 4 toughness creatures. And another thing is, don't underestimate Crypt Rats as a win condition. Let me tell you that I've used it a couple times to finish off an opponent with the X damage. Another thing just to keep in mind, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, but I like to remind people, these common sense things are occasionally what frustrate us the most when we forget them. So Crypt Rats, the mana that you use to activate its ability has to only be black mana. You can't use any of the blue mana, so if you're searching out lands with the Trinket Mage, go for a Vault first if you don't need the islands, and the same thing with the Evolving Wilds. You want to get extra black mana to be able to get a bigger activation off Crypt Rats. When it comes to creature kill, we also get 2 copies of Dead Weight. This is a great card because not only does it activate, act as a kill, it is sorcery speed, but it is a kill that can also just reduce a creature. If you get a creature that is absolutely too big, it is an enchantment, so it is not an until end of turn effect, and that can be really beneficial if used correctly. Next thing is Diabolic Edict. I think this is another fantastic addition to this deck. A lot of times you see mono black control and stuff running, stuff like Doomblade, etc. Targeted control options for creatures, but this actually gives you a much better standing when it comes to certain matchups. There is a hexproof deck out there, even though it does not show up very often. And more importantly, I think it gives you an advantage when it comes to the Infect matchup. The Infect matchup, will run, in most cases, even Stompy runs Vines of the Vastwood, and Vines of Vastwood is going to give them Shroud. And I don't know what it's like when you guys play it, but when I play it, it seems that they always have it in hand when they need it. Also with especially Infect, they run the Apostle's Blessing, which gives them Shroud. So using Edict correctly and efficiently will give you the ability to kill off a creature with Shroud. And I think that's a great thing for it to be running a full set of that. Next up on the list, we'll move towards creatures. We do have the Fume Spitters, which act as some creature control. Do have the ability to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. These work great in here's the thing I was talking about with Life Staff, right? So Life Staff, you gain 3 life whenever a creature that has been equipped with the staff dies. So you can end up in this nice little loop in the mid to late game where you have the mana available to do so. You have Fume Spitter in play, you have the Life Staff, and it is equipped, and then you sacrifice the Fume Spitter to itself. You can use Grim Harvest to, bring it back, and, reattach a Life Staff. I mean, essentially, the key thing here is the fact that Fume Spitter is a way that you can basically gain 3 life for paying the 1 mana of equipping. If you put the Life Staff on something like a Trinket Mage, then you're not going to have as much control. You can't really dictate necessarily when that creature dies. The only exception being the Fume Spitter. It's very easy. You don't need another card. You don't need to, do something stupid like cast Echoing Decay on a creature. You can actually just sacrifice the Fume Spitter to gain 3 life. Other than that, it's kind of nice. I do like the ability of having that 1-drop in the game. It's definitely a great thing to have. Grim Harvest, another great card to bring back. This deck is actually a little bit creature light. You have the Fume Spitters, and they basically will be dead most of the time. Some of the options to bring back aren't great. Ravenous Rats aren't necessarily going to be what you want. But when you use that Grim Harvest to bring back stuff like Muldrifter and Trinket Mage, then you're definitely going to be, sitting in a good spot. The best part about Grim Harvest is the fact that it has the ability to continuously come back to your hand if you have that 3 mana available for the Recover ability. Getting to the Muldrifters, the one thing that decks really need, especially a deck like this, I find, is the card draw. Once you kind of find, God, it's just every deck. I'm such an addict to hand advantage. I really am. Getting Muldrifters, and getting that card draw, you can evoke them, you can hard play them. Evoking works well with Grim Harvest. They're going to work really well to draw cards. Other than that, they're good flyers, which means that they can block. We do actually find ourselves in a situation where a lot of, especially the mono blue control decks, are running, fairies and stuff like that, and the Muldrifters will be able to kind of be a wall and put a stop to that, at least for a little while. Other than that, we do have 3 copies of Deep Analysis, which we bring in for card draw as well, and another great option because it has that flashback ability. Sometimes that 3 life may seem troublesome on the flashback that you see here on Deep Analysis, but actually it's going to work even better with the fact that you have Life Staff. If you sacrifice a creature to the Life Staff or a creature dies, then you've basically already paid for that 3 life on the Deep Analysis. And it's not such a big deal. You also you gotta be not afraid to spend a little life in order to get yourself in a point of advantage. I think sometimes newer players tend to be a little too conservative about their life and make really bad plays in order to stay as close to 20 as possible. I mean, in the end, it's not about being at 20 at the end of the game. It's not being at 0. So if you're 1 life and your opponent's at 0, well, you still won. So just something to keep in mind. Let's take a look at the sideboard I've been running with right here. Obviously going to be kind of a heavy focus on land destruction for the Cloud Post matchup. I am running 4 copies of Choking Sands. I think this is the best of the options available to us when it comes to black land destruction. I am also running 2 copies of Icequake. Now, a lot of mono black control decks have been bringing in Befoul as their option, and that's great because it also kills off a creature. So you have that option to do one or the other. The thing that really gets you, though, is the fact that it does cost an additional mana, and a lot of times decks prefer keeping to this kind of 3 mana cost slot. So you do have another option, and I can never remember the name of the card, but you do have the other option at 3 that destroys the land and has a Threshold ability. The Threshold ability does 1 damage to each creature this can be good, but I think actually it's a bit of a hindrance in this deck, because we do run 4 copies of the Fume Spitter, 4 copies of the Ravenous Rats. So, you could end up in a situation where you don't want to kill that land because you're going to kill all your creatures off, and that's not where you want to be. You want to actually, have those creatures on the board and be able to kill off the mana. And I think that's where Ice Quake comes into play. This extra part about the Snowland is 99.9% of the time never going to be a factor. So it's just basically read it as, pay 1 and 2 black to destroy target land. Let's see where else. We're also bringing in 2 copies of Dress. I said kind of nice to fill out that for the control option. Getting that extra 2 discard spells is fantastic. It actually, like I said, it's something that we think of first when it comes to control. At least I do. I used to be a heavy mono black control player, and that was, of course, my always answer every time it came to control is let's just destroy the hand. But it actually is very beneficial in other matchups, like I said earlier, Storm and Infect and Stompy, stuff like that. Excuse me, it can be very beneficial. We're bringing in the 4th copy of Echoing Decay for our matchup against Goblin Storm. It can also be, just regular Storm. Something to watch out for. A lot of times you will run into decks sideboarding, Storm decks that is sideboarding Echoing Decay, sideboarding around Echoing Decay. Sorry, so they will start with, Goblins game 1 and switch to Grape Shot game 2. Just something to keep in mind. Deadweight, there are some options here that I'm a little, back and forth on. Deadweight is one of those, maybe a 3rd copy, but I'm not necessarily sure it needs 4. Like I said, it's a great kill spell for 2/2 creatures. I'm sorry, the 2 toughness creatures just in general, which would definitely be your Delvers, etc. But, I'm not sure that it warrants 4 copies. It can also reduce creatures. Bringing in that card is essential in most aggro, affinity, etc. Even, mono blue control, it can be that way since they tend to be so much heavier on creatures these days. Next card that again, finding a little questionable is the Longbow. I guess this can have its benefits, killing off fairies and stuff, if you're afraid to attack through. It can also have benefits killing off, the bears, the phantom bears. You know what I mean. 1 blue, 2/2, when targeted, destroy. Stuff like that. But I find in most matches I haven't been bringing it in actually. So it's something that I've gone back and forth on. Last Rites is another one of those cards. This card is fantastic. 3 costs, discard, and you force your opponent to discard that many as well. This can be really great in matchups against control, but sometimes and I think perhaps it's just my ability as a player. Sometimes I find myself a little overly cautious on what to discard. On my end, 2 Last Rites. I'm usually pretty solid on knowing what I want to get rid of from my opponent's hand, but when it comes to figuring out what I can chuck to this, most of the time you're gonna maybe hold on to a land or 2 is your best bet. I think it's definitely a very powerful discard spell that is perhaps underused, but I definitely think it's also something you have to be kind of really smart about how you use it. So this is definitely something. If I were playing this competitive, I would work into looking at this sideboard and maybe making a couple altercations to it. But again, this isn't so much as I'm not trying to say, hey, this is how the deck works, this is how you dominate the metagame. I really just wanted to kind of showcase this deck as a really great opportunity for Trinket Mage to shine. I think it's something that is definitely underestimated, and can bring about a lot of great options for decks. And hopefully maybe seeing this can inspire you and inspire me even to kind of think outside of the box there and find other creative ways to work with Trinket Mage and work it into the Pauper decks, casual or otherwise. So there you go. I hope you enjoy it. Definitely check out some of the example games that I'm going to put up, and the article when it shows up on puremtgo.com.